On this weekend, where the majority of California is about to be put into a hardcore lockdown, the likes of which we've never seen, because it's supposed to be worse than the first one for a virus, a disease, if you will, that has a 99.98% survival rate. I want to talk to you, maybe, if my microphone holds out. I want to talk to you about what happens when you pair censorship of the media with a totalitarian form of government. And it is not a pretty scene, folks. And I want to take us on a little review of our history books and talk about the Holocaust in Nazi Germany. Yes. If you're okay with that. Yeah. All right. As a backdrop to this, I want to let you know that the road to hell is not actually paved with good intentions so much as a cookbook formulaic recipe for how to commit genocide and other human rights atrocities. It is a very simple formula. It has a couple of steps. First, you whip society into an absolute frenzy over basically nothing. Often it's a disease state because that's what gets our lizard brains into a big old frenzy quickest. And then you assign blame for whatever this condition is to a group. And then you go through and you use the media to disenfranchise that group so they do not have access to the microphones, so that they cannot tell their story, tell their truth to the people who could otherwise come to their rescue. And then media goes one step further in this little campaign, and it becomes a weapon that you use against the disenfranchised class itself. Propaganda. Because you drive them into apathy, knowing full damn well that if they're in apathy when you bring the tanks out, they will not fight you back, and you will have a much easier war on your hands. Yep. One of the final steps that they engage in is they mark you, right? By way of a tattoo, or a star in your window, or paperwork that you have to flash before you're allowed, into a certain place or out of a ghetto. Communism. It is communism. Thank you, sir. He is absolutely right. That is communism, and it has a lot in common with every other autocratic, dictatorial, totalitarian form of government. And we all know what the last damn step is, and it ain't a pretty one. You end up with a fast pass onto a cattle car to a place like Auschwitz. The media is absolutely critical and pivotal, certainly in modern times, to any of these human rights campaigns. So I want to take us to Nazi Germany, if you will. Everybody knows Hitler's name. Fewer people are aware of Joseph Goebbels. Joseph Goebbels was probably one of the most important men in the Holocaust, second only to Hitler. He was their minister of propaganda. All of the quotes I'm going to give you are taken from Wikipedia, so the people in the room behind me and the building behind me can kiss my you-know-what. Go ahead and try to censor this. It was off of Wikipedia this morning at 6 a.m. In 1943, Joseph Goebbels began to pressure Hitler to introduce measures that would produce a total war. And do you know what the first thing up to bat was to induce this total war? I'm going to read you a quote. Closing businesses that were not essential. Direct quote. You can go home and Google it, guys. The PR minister is the one who composed Hitler's decree doing this and proposing that the Nazis boycott the Jewish stores and businesses. And for his work, he was hailed as a hero. The Nazis then went on to target the head of the Berlin police department, who was a Jew. And they went on to engage in a relentless campaign in the hopes of provoking a crackdown that could then be exploited. Sound familiar to BLM's cries to defund the police recently? The Nazis used tactics like provocation and violence at meetings and demonstrations. Does this sound familiar to Antifa recently?
Brown shirts.
Okay, the brown shirts, thank you. The Nazi Party, as we well know, began to pass laws that marginalized the Jewish people. They forced, quote, all non-Aryans to retire from the legal profession. Why? Because the lawyers are the ones that are standing in the front of your chessboard between tyranny and hell and freedom. And if you get rid of the lawyers and you get rid of the judges, you have a much easier row to hoe than if you don't. So they got them to get rid of the legal profession, and then they got rid of any Jews in civil service, and then they just went through and made sure Jews couldn't work in any job. The PR machine was impressive as all get out. In 1930, a decade A decade before all the other stuff I've been talking about, Hitler went through and wiped out most of the press and replaced all of them with Joseph Goebbels as his Third Reich leader of propaganda. They passed an editor's law that required every single journalist to agree to regulate their work in accordance with socialism and Nazi dictates. They used catchy slogans, they used subliminal clues, they used leafletting from airplanes, pamphlets, brochures, radios, and film, which were all very new. And they knew if they could control these brand new methods of reaching the masses, that they could in turn control the masses. And if they could control them, they could kill them. Or they could make damn sure that the people who would stand in the way were so brainwashed they wouldn't stop the Jews from being exterminated. Their PR machine had 7 different divisions: legal and administration, mass rallies, public health, youth and race, radio, national, foreign press, film and film censorship, art, music, theater, protection against counter-propaganda, both foreign and domestic. Do you understand just how far-reaching the ownership of the airwaves in Nazi Germany was? If you wanted to work, you had to be a member of their little profession. And in this way, quote, anyone whose views were contrary to the regime could be excluded from working in their chosen field and thus silenced. A committee was established to censor the books. No more books. They gave out free radios on Joseph Goebbels' birthday, and then Hitler went through and took control of all of the radios and airwaves nationwide. At that point, it was a pretty easy downhill row for them because they made it illegal to listen to any foreign radio programs. And if you disseminated truth or any foreign TV, radio, film, anything, do you know what the sentence was? Yeah. It was death. And that makes damn sure that nobody will speak up if the penalty for doing so is death. Hitler's Minister of War later said on record, and I quote, "The regime made the complete use of all technical means for domination of its own country. Through technical devices like radio and loudspeaker, 80 million people were deprived of independent thought." The Nazi propaganda by historians and the PR machine and Joseph Goebbels was essential to, quote, motivating those who implemented the mass murder of the Jews. But more importantly, it served the acquiescence of millions of others, the bystanders, who turned a blind eye to the racially targeted persecution and mass murder. I want you to understand this one point and understand it well, because the history books demonize Hitler, and that's all well and good because he was no saint. But the Holocaust was not the result of Hitler. The Holocaust was the result of the fact that he got millions of people to go into agreement with him, and he did that through the singular control of the media channels. If you're not aware of this, he also targeted the black population. He was the father of niche marketing. For the blacks who resided in Germany, he lumped them in with the Jews and said they needed to be exterminated. But for the blacks who were serving on our side and trying to go in there and get truth and justice on the matter, he dropped leaflets onto the black populations and the black foot soldiers in our forces and said, hey, go ahead and desert because we'll treat you better than America does. The actual quote, all the leaflets urged African American soldiers to surrender to German troops rather than serving as cannon fodder for a white America that denied them equality. Polarizing, different messages for blacks depending on what line you were behind or not. The lies didn't hold, y'all. America wasn't perfect, certainly not on the issue of racial discrimination. But in the end, we did the right thing, because when we sent in our troops to liberate those damned camps like Auschwitz and the other concentration camps, we sent in men of every color. And it was an African-American journalist by the name of Vincent Tubbs, who was a wartime correspondent for the Afro-American paper, who ended up describing the scenes he encountered when he helped liberate Dachau. And what he said, and I quote, inside I saw the Nazi atrocities you read about, but you never believe until you have seen it for yourself. The charred bodies of uncountable men. On my honor, It was one of the most inhumane attempts at race extermination that any people ever suffered. The inmates, both those dead and surviving, were all Jews. On the day that he penned those words, in my humble opinion, he ignited a fire of truth that began to sweep over the world and went worldwide, and has started to expose the atrocities that happen when you combine censorship and a totalitarian government that is hell-bent on destroying her people. I want to give you a couple of quotes as I draw to a close, on a cautionary note and then a more hopeful note. These are from Truman. Once a government is committed to the principle of silencing the voice of opposition, it has only one way to go, and that is down the path of increasingly repressive measures until it becomes a source of terror to all of its citizens and creates a country where everyone lives in fear. Put more simply, in the words of a German poet, where they have burned books, they will end in burning human beings. JFK and FDR gave us some more hopeful thoughts. JFK said, if this nation is to be wise as well as strong, if we are to achieve our destiny, then we must know all the facts, and we must welcome the controversial books and the controversial authors of those books, for the Bill of Rights is the guardian of our security as well as our liberty. And FDR said before JFK, in this war, and make no mistake, folks, we're at war right now. In this war, books are weapons, and it is part of your dedication always to make them weapons for man's freedom. Did you hear what I just said? Did you hear me? I ask again, did you hear me, America? We are not speaking German right now for a reason. We are not saying Heil Hitler for a reason. We fought down tyranny in World War I. We fought it down again in World War II. And for the men and women in this country who are patriots amongst us, we will weaponize information of truth. And God bless us, we will fight a third revolution if that is what is required. Defend liberty and justice. Because those are the notions on which this great country was founded, and I, for one, will not let them die on my watch. God bless this country. God bless every man and woman in it. And God bless every last principle on which she stands.
Yeah. Woo! You'll make General Fetch me proud, man.